Thank you, Gabriel. That was a very good explanation of what this technology is and potentially what it can do. Um, getting from that potential to what it will do, I think, is going to be a difficult task. But that's the reason we're here today. Um, Next, I'd like to hear from Mr. Jeremy Stephen. Um, you wrote an interesting paper about should cryptocurrencies be included in a portfolio of international reserves held by the Central Bank of Barbados, and I was wondering if you could tell us about that and what your conclusion was.
All right, well, excuse me. Good afternoon to all. I know we just had some lunch and I'm feeling it myself, so hopefully we can have a bit of a lively discussion this evening, and I'm going to intentionally throw some spokes in certain wheels, as was the purpose of the paper. Now, yeah, it was intended, number one, to show the Central Bank of Barbados, which up to that point was losing like almost 2 million Barbados dollars, 6 million TT a year, a central bank. And to make matters even more interesting, something that a lot of people don't know about, and we did not even pay much mind to it on the paper, is the fact that there are only really 3 profitable central banks in the world. None of them exist in the region. Don't fool yourself. All right, so essentially it means that most global currencies, fiat dollars, are actually under threat. The ability of a central bank to defend their local currencies is becoming even more contrite, hence why we're in an age of negative interest rates. It only works out for that purpose. So, I was having a discussion with my head of department, Professor Moore, some time back. I was following very deeply, just like Gabriel, for some time, and he brought me into it in a way, cryptocurrencies. And I was thinking to myself, okay, given the volatility, the things that were scaring people about Bitcoin for some years now, the fact that today it could be at $1,000 and then tomorrow seemingly 500, and yes, I'm exaggerating here, but it was wildly volatile. But volatility, anybody who's into financial markets knows that volatility can be your friend, especially if you know how to manage your financial resources. So I posed the question to him. He doesn't know much about cryptocurrencies. He's an econometrician. So I had to ensure that the following question was economically sound. What if the Central Bank of Barbados, which has a mandate to hold the Barbados dollar at $2 billion to 1 US, what if they decided to hold some segment of their reserves in Bitcoin? What would be the outcome? My hypothesis was they would actually have made money on the reserves over the last 5 years if they did hold a percentage. So we did some Monte Carlo simulation, some rather radical and nice econometric analysis, very sound econometric analysis. And it proved, at least given our models, and we haven't really had anybody but probably one guy who is known to be a maverick in the field, I will not call his name, internationally opposing the paper. And it was, thanks to Gabriel, because I had no idea. In fact, I was on a plane. I just had gotten off a plane when he messaged me. It became the most popular thing about Barbados for the last 2 months of last year. If you Googled Barbados, that paper came up over and over and over. It was amazing. And the thinking was if you held 5%, only 5% of your reserves in Bitcoin, the Central Bank of Barbados would have been profitable for the last 5 years. In other words, it doesn't have, in terms of assets, liquid assets, hundreds of billions of dollars. No, it does not. It has tens of billions on paper. It's not that big of a bank when you think about it. In fact, no Caribbean central bank is that big of a bank. So it would have, if it only had 5%, for argument's sake, let's say it had 100 million Barbados dollars in liquid assets. Part of it is NFA, net financial assets, net foreign assets, so US dollars overseas, so I'm including Bajan dollars and reserves. And you said, of all of those assets, 5%, which would be roughly $5 million, right? Barbados dollars. You're arguing that if those were converted to Bitcoin, so 2.5, I said billion initially, right? So 5 billion, so 2.5 billion Barbados dollars, US dollars, would have been held in Bitcoin for argument's sake. The market could more than support it, in a sense. if it were to do it like that. So they could, if there was ever a run on the Barbados dollar, go on to the multiple markets. There are several markets that they could go on to. They could have used Bitt. They could have even, if they had the technology expertise, gone on to the markets, the different exchanges, and sold Bitcoin for US dollars, if need be. So it could be used as a tool, okay, to help stem capital flight in a sense, and to help defend the currency. And I remember presenting it in a room like this, and our governor, who has been quite a friend to the movement, but had to hold a position as a governor, slept through the paper. Right? Slept through the paper. And I understand, well, when I mean slept, I didn't mean physically slept, but rather just did not pay much mind to the findings. But yet he couldn't refute the fact that, yes, the Central Bank of Barbados mathematically would have been in a better position to defend our currency if there were a run. So look at the policy implications that could have for place once this whole idea of cryptocurrencies becomes more accepted, because it will. It's cheaper, it's more affordable. In terms of security, it's better. So why not look at it as a part of your policy implications going forward in the future? Look at how Jamaica might be able to stop depreciating their currency if they're able to radically and efficiently defend their currency at a moment's notice. And they have a much more market-driven currency than Barbados does. Our central bank sets that rate, and that's it. But in Jamaica, it's a collaboration between commercial banking interests, the wider private sector, and the Bank of Jamaica. Imagine what that would mean for our guys down there in the Twin Towers. They have been dirty floating for a couple of years, but right now your currency is overvalued, and you know it. You know it. But if they were able to defend it, if you knew that they had a very liquid asset, because you have a shortage of US dollars on island, if you had something, you could have easily, or can easily, if need be, defend the Trinidadian dollar. So I'm not even talking about all the aspects that Gabriel put in place before you, which was quite well presented. My interest begins but not ends with the fact that it could be used in the Caribbean to defend very fragile monetary systems that we have. And the paper's main finding was the fact that we should encourage our central banks, or any small open economy, should try its best to as part of their central banking policy, use cryptocurrencies, one, or if they're able to, if they could have come in much earlier, actually mined the currencies as well. Gabriel, you spoke about mining just now? No. All right, so essentially, part of the system back then, no, I know they won't be able to do it now, but back in the day, a couple years ago, anyone with a computer and with enough computing power could have loaned their system, their computing system, to the blockchain and produce coins by running the algorithm that Gabriel alluded to, right? But the more, especially with Bitcoin, since they're so near to the limit, the 21 million coin limit, it's becoming even tougher. Yeah, but I mean, it's becoming even tougher. I don't think they're stupid. It's becoming even tougher to produce Bitcoin. So the point to us, what we were saying to the central bank was, okay, if you had started a couple years ago, maybe if you had set up a mining operation, you could have afforded more Bitcoin earlier on. So yes, it makes more sense then, the final outcome, to talk to people, talk to companies like Bitt, because you're too late to actually be a meaningful player in that market now. And that's what the paper ended off with saying. And as a result, I think the Bank of England started doing research as a result of this paper, and they're looking to do their own coin. Yeah, RS coin. And that was influenced by work done in Barbados. The Bank of Canada as well. Central Bank in Canada, they're looking into the research as well. So they take away from the paper, because there are other things we could talk about once the panel really starts switching around, whatever. But the takeaway, as was asked of me, was that we need to take the advent of cryptocurrencies, not just Bitcoin, way more seriously than we are. Because if we are not in a position from a regulatory standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, to understand and to facilitate and to interact with facilitators quickly, capital flight will be the biggest issue you have on your plate. Thanks.
Thank you. That was a very, very nice summary. Shiva, do you have anything to say about this?
So, yeah, I think Gabriel and Jeremy presented good points. Gabriel coming from the entrepreneurial perspective, Jeremy from the economics perspective. I mean, you guys heard about my perspective yesterday, which is more from the research, technology, innovation opportunity that is there to be explored. My personal perspective is that I'm proud as a Caribbean man to see that we are doing something in this area. I mean, something in this area that is, could potentially have us competing on a global scale. To me, the innovation is there to be explored. The risk is there as well, but we can't hide from the risk. You need to understand the risk. You need to at least get a grasp of what it is we're talking about from a regulation standpoint or a compliance standpoint, or and appreciate that, yes, there are risks, but following the footsteps of the financial capitals of the world. The Singapores, the New Yorks, the Londons, they've all looked at this topic of digital currency and they have concluded that there is something there. There is something there that we could potentially participate in for economic development. To us in the Caribbean here, it is to our detriment if we choose to ignore it. So my contribution will be to this room, at least look into it and see what is the promise that is there. I mean, we've put out some good research. I mean, we've done a paper. We've done a paper. We actually have an entrepreneur here now that's offering services in Barbados, and to his credit, I mean, when we met about 3 years ago, 3 years ago, we were both struggling. Now it's only I that's struggling. But anyway, I mean, no. But what I mean is he's gotten the buy-in of his finance minister. He's gotten the buy-in of his central bank governor, and he's gotten the buy-in of investors overseas. So what is it that he is doing in Barbados that we can't do here in Trinidad and Tobago or in other Caribbean territories? That's the question that we need to ask, right? That's it.
All right. I had another question for entrepreneur down there. One of the things I saw you mentioned in your presentation was correspondent banking. The Caribbean has a large and growing problem in that a number of correspondent banking relationships between banks in the region and in the United States are getting cut off as a result of de-risking and a number of new regulations that have come into place in the United States, which have made it difficult for me personally to do some banking, and it's a problem. So I'm wondering, is there potentially some kind of blockchain solution to this issue of how do you have banks exchange money with each other? How can blockchain be worked into the clearinghouse process to cut the correspondent banks out of the system, so that it can be, if money needs to go from one bank in the Caribbean to another, it can happen and it doesn't need to go through New York.
Okay. Well, the short answer is absolutely. There's an alternative now where we don't have to depend on the traditional correspondent banking. Right now, we, as a matter of fact, we don't have a bank account in Barbados. Our company does not have a bank account in Barbados. But yet, we do business with anyone, anywhere in the world, and we don't have a problem getting a payment or making a payment. And we don't have a bank account in Barbados. What we're working on as a company is working with our regulators and our central bank, specifically, and our Ministry of Finance, to classify a new type of banking called a payment bank. A payment bank is a bank that doesn't give access to credit, loans, mortgages, or overdraft. It's not a loaning institution. It's a deposit-taking and a facilitation of payment solution for banking. You merge that with distributed ledger technologies like Bitcoin, and you have your homegrown local solution for international global banking system. You do this in every island. Barbadians can now directly pay Trinidadians. Barbadian banks can now directly settle with Trinidadian banks. We no longer need to shop out our transactions to the United States. Jamaica can pay Barbados, and the rest of the fragmented CARICOM and OECS territories can now directly interface and make payments. So your answer, the answer to your question, Bobby, is yes, we can solve that problem. Yes, blockchain technology solves that problem. It more than solves it. It is the exact solution that we need, where we in the Caribbean no longer have to be threatened by this de-risking scenario. And furthermore, we can actually leapfrog once again the technology and actually have a more efficient system than they do across the river.
Okay. I wanted to ask Jeremy, how do you get from point A to point B? I mean, you've shared an innovative idea in terms of having the central bank own some cryptocurrencies, and if they'd done that 5 years ago, they'd be doing very well. I agree. But 5 years ago, this was an infant technology. Central bankers are known for good reason to be conservative about this stuff. And that's a good thing. I like having a conservative central bank to a point. At some point, you gotta get them to step over the line. And how does that happen?
There's an anecdote my grandmom used to give me about conservatism, which every time I think I'm a bit too risk averse, it reminds me it makes no sense. And she always said to me, "Did I ever see a mountain goat fall?" And when you think about it, because she was into National Geographic and that stuff, bless her soul. And a mountain goat never fell because it always looked out for its own interest despite climbing the same mountain as the rest of the goats. So when one is, unfortunately, our central bank tends to be like sheep, or central banks in the region, where they go in the same direction, but no one is looking to secure their own interests entirely, given their own unique situations. And being a former central banker myself, I understood that about them. But I'm always reminded as an academic and a quasi-professional that kind of conservatism doesn't make any sense in today's world. You've got, for instance, if we were to borrow from Estonia as a culture, I mean, they in 2014 released an e-residency, which to me is an even bigger threat. That concept is a bigger threat than the risking that's going on in the Caribbean, because any citizen here who has $112 US today, and I'm giving you this advice, so don't call me a tax cheat. Well, any citizen in here with 112 US can buy e-residency in Estonia. And what does that afford you? You essentially, if you're a business person, can have a bank account in Estonia. So that's in the EU. All of a sudden, you've got an EU bank account, no problems. You pay taxes in Estonia. And if you're like Barbados with double taxation treaties, that's even better for me because there's no income tax on company profits in Estonia once they're not distributed. So if they're kept in Estonia. So once you expense your account in Estonia, my God, who cares? You're not paying any income taxes anyhow. And in the Caribbean, where we're struggling to collect taxes, and especially in Barbados, if more Barbadian entrepreneurs really knew about this, because it doesn't cost you anything. Anybody can do it. The only right that you don't have is that you can't vote in Estonian elections, nor can you physically move there to live, but everything else you can get through that. So it's that kind of thinking in the digital economy that shows me that sooner or later regional central banks might have to, and governments, and let's extend the argument to governments as well, would have to come up with not only innovative ways, but radical ways to ensure the economies remain viable. So the Central Bank of Barbados, the way they have proceeded, which is conservative, but yet still, because nobody else in the region, except for probably here, or Jamaica really, are taking a government-led approach, or public approach, or legislative approach to dealing with cryptocurrencies. And our governor has been working quite closely and providing opportunities to Bitt and other entrepreneurs in this sphere, understanding that though legally he can't allow them to operate, he can still approve, or sorry, he can allow but can't approve, if you see where I'm coming from. I would like, and this comes from having companies like Bitt, academics like myself and Professor Moore continue to produce work which allows them to say, okay, the benefits definitely outweigh the costs. And unfortunately, that might take a year or two before they come to that determination, but yet you still got this impending threat of total de-risking going on, even de-risking domestically. Right? In the case of, there are quite a few companies that have been domestically de-risked. If a couple million comes into your pocket, yeah.
Let me just jump in there. With respect to what Jeremy was just saying, and it goes back to what the Commonwealth Secretary had said yesterday with respect to providing some sort of legal certainty towards this thing as to if companies can operate in the space. So it's not necessarily that they are saying that it's illegal or they can't operate in the space. They just need some sort of legal certainty to say, yes, we have no problems with respect to this type of operation, provided, of course, that entrepreneurs in the space do their due diligence or do their compliance, and they approach the regulators and build out a case that, yes, our products meet to your specification. The consumer protection is built in. All the risk measures, the AML, CFT risks are catered for when we have a strong, viable product. So I think that's because there was a question yesterday about what the Commonwealth Secretary said, but that is the legal certainty that is required to see something like this taken off within a territory within the Caribbean.
And the central banks basically should not at this point look to become minors. I need to repeat that. So if there's any step going forward, they have to work very closely with those facilitated in the market.
And the beautiful part about the exploration of digital currencies as we move forward is that it actually does give real legs to entrepreneurs to stand up on their own and become global thinkers. But the most important aspect of this whole thing is the fact that companies like ours are beginning to exist in these regions of the world. And I know from our own plans of expansion into Trinidad and Jamaica in the coming days or weeks, that there are moves to bring more advent of digital currencies into these markets. But the beautiful part is, with or without us, these things are coming. So they need to be focused on, and decisions need to be made. But I would caution against the regulation of the software. It absolutely, at all points, should never be done. Bitcoin technology is like the internet. However, the companies like Bitt.com are the companies that you would look to regulate. The technology is something that we don't know where it can go or what it can be, and it shouldn't be hindered. It should be observed from a distance, and the companies interfacing with it are the ones that you can regulate.
And that is something that we found within our study. That is something that the Commonwealth Secretary found within their study. It's something that's recognized within the FATF, AML, CFT guidance for virtual currencies, that you really can't regulate the protocol itself, or you shouldn't seek to regulate the protocol. What you should seek to regulate, if regulation is deemed necessary, is you should seek to regulate the interaction with the traditional economy. So your interaction points with your fiat currency is where the regulation can take place, and that's at the point of a digital currency exchange per se. The regulation of the technology itself, it's no, you don't do that.
You don't do that.
Well, we actually have all day tomorrow to talk about regulation, and I have some skepticism there, but I will save it for tomorrow. What I'd like to talk about, we've been talking about how do we meet the expectations of regulators so far, but regulators and governments, that's just a part of the equation. How do you get the public interested? I mean, this Bitcoin, I've tried it. It's interesting, but ultimately it's pretty fiddly. The price goes up and down, and I gotta have a wallet, and I gotta remember where that is, and transferring money and
Yeah,
it's a pain.
Yeah. So
how do you improve that situation so this is something people really want to use?
and if we look at Michelle Stefan's presentation earlier. The consumer awareness of the mobile money product within Haiti, they were not aware of the full potential of it. So definitely for digital currency product per se, industry awareness with the governments and the regulators is a given. Also as well, what is required is industry awareness with the population itself. The industry must make the population aware of the risks, they must make the population aware of the benefits, and it's then up to the population to make a decision, or the consumer to make a decision on whether they want to participate or not. So there's definitely a need, and the Commonwealth Secretariat report points to this as well, that industry associations need to be found to promote the products and services. And that is both at the government regulator level as well as the population level.
Well, I mean, aside from the generic answer, which is you do great advertising, the obvious thing there is, aside from making sure that your brand is a trustworthy brand, and this comes with working with the regulators, the next step is making sure that you build a sound product, and this is by making sure your clients are extremely happy with what you do have. The very next step after that for this adoption and awareness is utility. You start building out the utility, and while it was noted that in Haiti, people didn't realize how powerful this was, the beautiful part about the technology is that you can always extend it. So you give an initial product that solves a major problem. You advertise around that major problem, and you help users use it and solve that problem. But then you eventually start adding other layers of utility, whether it's bill payment or the ability to go shop at your local restaurant, or even if it could be something like a loyalty point system. There's many things that you can do with programmable currency. And because you can make interesting features and consumer-facing products, that in of its own self should be a pretty viral occurrence. Just like the usefulness of WhatsApp or instant messaging systems, or the penetration, or the quick penetration that we've seen of how BlackBerry died and quickly iPhone and Android came in. Better systems thrive better. And you obviously you ensure that the advertising of the product is there, but the underlying fundamentals are a cheaper, faster, better, more efficient system. And that does the job of selling itself, to be quite honest.
And at least within the region, I figure, especially if there's some legal opinion, as Shiva said, there's some kind of legal framework that supports and regulates the players in the market, you will get traction quite easily. Right now, frustration with the traditional banking sector is at an all-time high, at least in the OECS and in Barbados. In Jamaica, I don't get that sense just yet. I would never vote for Trinidad, because and here's the reason why: I don't know enough. My scope area does not include it. But I'll take what you're saying, and if the audience is thinking that it's the same, that you are frustrated with the traditional system here, then it only makes the case way more appealing. In the OECS, very recently, RBTT just issued a $20 EC dollar, it's 25 EC dollar a month charge on accounts. And it's no matter the limit, right? And mind you, that's a bit more draconian than what we have in Barbados, where if you're below, in some cases, 1,000 Barbados dollars, or as the case would be with RBC, $500, that they're charging you around $10 a month, Barbados dollars a month, 30 TT. All right, just to make an interest. Essentially, what that has done is to make bank accounts in the OECS and in Barbados pay negative interest rates. We've got essentially interest rates at 0.25% in Barbados right now, savings accounts. So essentially, you are paying the banks to keep your money, right? And that, if that doesn't produce a much more compelling case to at least have reputable companies that could at least hedge volatility in crypto for you in the near future, I don't know what else can, to be honest.
Interesting perspectives. Perhaps there are some questions in the audience. I've been hogging these guys. They're interesting people, but I've been asking all the questions. So yeah.
Oh,
Yes, it's on now. Yes, good day. Nigel Casimir from the CTU. Very interesting presentation, and it's an intriguing subject that I think we have a lot to learn about. And Jeremy made mention of a paper in which the central banks were urged to start keeping some proportion of their money in Bitcoin to improve profitability. Do you see that happening, and what do you see as the greatest barrier to that happening, in as far as the central banks becoming a bit more involved with this whole cryptocurrency?
Wish for me to answer now?
Yes.
Okay. No, I don't see it happening, given the current state of central banking in the region, despite it being a good reprieve. And the second question you would have asked just now is,
Why? What would it take?
what's the biggest barrier? The thing that we are here on this panel trying to get rid of, under education in the area of cryptocurrencies. The more, and that's why I applaud people like Gabriel. It's actually my public duty to go and talk. But if I were him, I wouldn't be talking as much as he does. But he's seen the bigger picture in terms of a vision for the entire region. And if you're leading from up front, taking the financial risk, he figures, at least, and I do, as an observer and supporter, that other people would follow. And the regulators, we were told this yesterday in a meeting that we had, regulators will follow when not only you've done a lot of the good work and put a lot of work on the ground, but when you've actually built systems that provide track records of success. So it will take companies like Gabriel's, like Bitt, like the Bitt bots, you said? Bitbox, never heard of them until today. Definitely would check out what they're doing. It would take more of those companies, the ones in Haiti, going out there and operating outside of the boundaries of regulation that can't define what they're doing just yet, and saying to government, we want you to work with us because we want you to trust us because we need your trust in order to grab more people. So the system is very circular. If central banks allow the adoption of it and define it, then there will be more reasons for other central banks in the region because they follow each other very closely. All of us are part of a commonwealth in a sense. So that is what is going to happen. I know I gave you a high-level answer, but I don't know what the other regional governors' perspectives are. But I do know that the central bank governor, this is probably where you might want to go, in Barbados, is not a technophobe. He does most of his reports online, streaming, like what we're doing here right now. He's pushed more stuff on the open web for persons like Shiva to go and easily research what's happening at our central bank. And he has not killed the conversation, which is important. He hasn't killed it yet. He can't define it, define what the outcomes will be. So that gives us some kind of hope. But given the current framework, I don't think it will happen. But it requires some education and years of knocking on doors.
Thank you.
Stefan again. So very interesting debate.
Yes,
As a fintech entrepreneur myself, I showed you how I had to fight with the central bank to get some things done. And also you have seen that sometimes regulators can also just take a decision and they kill you. So in that sense, yesterday when I was looking at the presentation of the digital currency and the blockchain, there are 3 characteristics that were presented as strengths for this. And I'm asking myself, is it really what we have to emphasize on? The first is anonymous. Okay? Are we not scaring regulators when we put forward that that system can help people be anonymous when they do the transactions? So what is your take on that? Is it a good thing to actually claim to do that? The second thing is double spend. Is it really an issue? Do we have the services today? Is it a real threat that we can double spend when we make a traditional transaction with credit card or even mobile money. I don't think that ever happened. Even with the mobile money transfer that we're doing, that never happened once. Although we are not using the blockchain. That's the second one. And the third and last one is no reversal of transactions. Because in real world, sometimes you do a transaction, you want to cancel it because you made an error or whatever. There's even chargeback for the credit card industry. So what is your take on these three characteristics that you say are strengths? And is it actually a good strategy to actually, if we want to really have acceptance from regulators and even bankers for this technology?
Okay, so start from the first one, which I believe was anonymity. So Bitcoin is not anonymous, it's pseudonymous. The identity of the user is not known until they enter a system. So there's no anonymity in the Bitcoin network, pseudonymity. So I don't know you initially, but your identity is fixed to a cryptographic key. And at the point of your expenditure on Bitt.com, for example, and we do our KYC, all of your past coin and expenditure and all your future coin and expenditure can be easily verified. It's probably the worst system in the world to define as anonymous. It's the furthest thing from that. The second problem, the double spend attack. So this is a speculative attack, and what this occurs is when somebody tries to send a transaction to two people at the same time while creating race conditions that one transaction occurs before the other, while fooling the one that was meant to really receive it. Now, these are, once again, speculative attacks that require a lot of energy, a lot of old coinage. It's very technical to go into it, but the point is a double spend attack is a very hard attack to pull off, B, it's very costly to pull off, and C, it's very easy to thwart. So one of the things that you can thwart it with is waiting for the 6 confirmations, mathematical confirmations, to find 6 blocks in Bitcoin. That's one of the simplest, easiest ways. But then there's more current networks like the Thunder and Lightning network being built on top of the Bitcoin layers to allow transactions to occur instantly with zero risk of double spending attacks. So double spending attacks occur when the users are not allowing the right proof of work to occur with enough time. So double spends are not a threat if you know, like at Bitt, for example, if it could be a threat to us if you deposited $1 million in Bitcoin and then I credited you with cash, you pulled the cash out but then double spent it and pulled the Bitcoin back out. Well, first of all, you have 10 minutes to do that. But let's just assume that we were digital and really efficient and it was swapping one digital asset for another. So there was no time delay. So you deposited $1 million with us and you immediately try to double spend it by sending that $1 million to someone else in Bitcoin. We as a company, first of all, over a threshold make it so that 6 confirmations have to occur on the blockchain. And that's one of the simplest ways right there. Any attack possible is dead and it didn't cost us anything beyond waiting the confirmation times. The second thing is going through the sidechain networks and alternative networks that are cryptographically pinned to Bitcoin. They allow us to have systems where double spending will not occur. And there's a bunch of other solutions out there for double spending attacks. But once again, very unlikely you'll see someone doing it because of the cost involved in doing that. And more than likely, you'll easily identify a double spend attack. We are dealing, after all, with a transparent ledger. Your last question was related to, I'm sorry? Right, no reversals. Yeah, that's true. Bitcoin's a one-direction payment system, but it's also an open source platform, and there is this thing called the Bitcoin Improvement Proposals, or the BIPs, where developers like myself can propose an improvement to the Bitcoin protocol. And we have seen these with BIP 70 and BIP 75 specifically. That will address your question. What this means is that when a customer makes a payment, there should be a return address, expecting that in the e-commerce world, returns are a real thing. Now, one-way directions aren't too bad, especially when most of the credit card companies' fees are based around the chargeback fraudulent fees that occur. So a double spend system is, a one direction payment system is exactly what we want in the Caribbean. The ability when you made a payment to me, I know you couldn't reverse it on my digital good. But then furthering that, coupling it with the Bitcoin improvement proposals, specifically like the payment proposal, the BIP 75 or 70, sorry, you have the ability to have a return functionality there, where like Visa or MasterCard, there's a reversal of the transaction that occurs at the merchant's discrepancy. You don't get, or rather in this case, the consumer would go and call the merchant, the credit card company and complain. In our case, there may be an occurrence if we were offering an escrow service, and there's a gap here for another company to offer this because we're not offering an escrow service around Bitcoin payments. So I'm now going to act as a central authority to restrict that payment. So long story short, all three of the problems that you identified are not actual threats or risks to companies like ours. While they are, you're welcome to come back up if you wish to keep the conversation fluid, but the moderator would probably object to that. Well, never mind.
I mean, first, thank you because you actually explained some of the things that are very technical. So my question is not whether or not they are threats for you as a company,
But
but
threats for any company looking to involve themselves with this technology, where do we expose ourselves? And if you yourself in Haiti was looking to adopt this technology, those are the first three things in your head right now. Are these threats to my company in Haiti? They absolutely
No.
are not.
I understand. So my question was, if you are talking to a regulator, okay, you want acceptance from the regulator. It's different from if you're talking to a customer, for example. You say, you know, if you pay, there's no way you can reverse it. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, so the regulator will come from a perspective of protection of the
Yes.
consumers, etc.
Exactly. So if you're talking to banks, you want to open an account with the bank, you say, I would not put forward, anonymity is in contrary. I would say, here's how you can identify the customer so that you understand what my point is.
Absolutely.
Depending on who you're talking to, what are you going to emphasize on? Because basically, people will compare the digital currency with the traditional means that we have now. What are you doing now that's going to be better for your customer? What are you doing now that are you being better for fighting money laundering and things like that? So that's
and I thought this exact way when we started Bitt a couple of years ago, and this is thinking that exact same way is what drove us to produce policies and procedures that met the needs of regulators or a central bank or a minister of finance or a minister of trade or an investment group. The various policies and procedures would have been the same across the board, but what was presented in terms of here's some educational formatting document of double spending. A regulator doesn't want to know about that, but they would want to know about the anonymous nature. But a bank would want to know about the double spending problem. So I do agree with the content presented to the right audience is absolutely something that we do. Thank you.
Let me just add one thing here, and I think we were all salivating over your question because from my perspective, double spend is one of the things I addressed in the presentation yesterday. And from the anonymity perspective, that's exactly why. And you asked the right question as well. How do you position a response to the regulator? And that's exactly why we produced that study and that report. And anonymity is dealt with within that report. It is these are the types of questions. Aside from what a specific product or service will offer towards that, we need to understand it from an industry level or from a protocol level, how these things operate. And that's exactly why I advocate for further research into this thing and further edification of authorities on these matters.
I believe we have a question from the internet.
Thanks, Bobby. Yeah, we've got two questions from people participating online. So from the issue of exchange of BTC for TTD, what's the current regulatory stance in TNT for the average business person to accept something like Bitcoin as a form of payment? That's the first question.
So going back to the Commonwealth Secretariat presentation, their first point was provision of legal certainty. And legal certainty doesn't mean yes or no, it just means provide some sort of advice as to whether or not this thing a company can operate. I could be mistaken, but from my understanding of Gabriel's experience is that no such legal certainty currently exists with respect to operating in Trinidad. Now, that doesn't mean he can't operate in Trinidad. That just means he doesn't have a sufficient level of assurance that if he does operate, he wouldn't be treated as an illegal operation. So I think the first step we need to take, and this is going back to, again, the Commonwealth Secretariat report and presentation, we need to have some sort of legal certainty as to whether or not entrepreneurs would be welcomed in our space. Otherwise, we could be potentially, restricting entrepreneurs from operating in this space.
And I can add further to that to say that we have engaged regulators in Trinidad, we have engaged the government, we've met with various government officials here, as a matter of fact, and we have engaged the central bank. At current, there are no laws that prohibit us from operating. I can, in fact, probably operate tomorrow. But the problem comes down to it of what happens when you don't make these guys aware, and it's something that they're not happy with because they see it as a big scary monster. And that's been our hindrance as an organization from expanding into Trinidad. But the good part is the conversations are being had, and like Shiva said, they need to continue. They need to continue, and the research needs to continue. We will, as a organization, definitely push the frontier in Trinidad and Tobago. But as of right now, there have been no standings beyond a 2013 publication in The Guardian, where the central bank, the previous Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, advised any citizens or businesses interfacing with the cryptocurrency or cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin need to seek the permission of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. And that's the closest thing that we have to acknowledgement.
The second question is, there was a mention previously about educating on cryptocurrency. Any suggestions on how best to go about this? And who should the education be targeted to? The regulators, the entrepreneurs, the general public, anyone else?
Okay, if I can start with the last question, it should be targeted to everyone. Remember, what you're trying to do is to have a very inclusive system, financial system. One that operates outside of not outside, but aside the traditional financial system as it stands. So everybody should be educated, and everybody should have an appetite for education, because this technology it's not a big bad monster, but it definitely is ominous. And it has application outside of finance as well, and would very well rule or be utilized in your daily lives, from opening a car door. Yeah, there's a rental company in states right now that uses the same cryptographic technology and tokenizes it and uses it to verify that a driver is the actual driver assigned to this car. Movie theaters do it. There's a movie theater, I think, in Arkansas that has begun to do it as a way to get discounts on their movie tickets. And there's several other applications. The government of Honduras uses it for their land registry right now. Well, they wanted to use it for the land registry. They just feel right good. So good. Notwithstanding it, the intention is there, if you see where I'm coming from. So the educational sources, there's a lot of stuff up there. There are websites like, throw one at me quick there, Gabby, Coinbase. There's BTC News as well. You can find some hot topics there. Bitcoin.com as well as a central site for us. And Reddit. I like Reddit as well. Reddit r Bitcoin. You will find a lot of good topical issues and educational issues there. Even stuff like Investopedia.com right now is looking at the whole exercise of what is a Bitcoin and why is it tangible, why is it useful. So the educational resources are out there. You just need to start Googling.
Shameless plug here, but the education starts with that little green book you all got in your packets there. And that green book represents some significant research that ECLAC did, and it is available to regulators, it's available to the general public. On a wider, tackling that question on a wider basis, it doesn't make sense creating products if the public's not going to use it. So you can get all the regulatory approval you want for your products. If the public doesn't have trust in it, and this was something that we found within that study, that the industry association needs to come together to educate the public as well and gain the public's trust. Usability is an issue, utility is an issue, So the education not only it has to happen at different points with different people, and start with that little green book that you got in your pocket.
Okay, I believe we have time for one more question.
Yes, Sylvester Cadet, ITU. You have mentioned, and in part some of what I'm going to ask is related to education, yes. But you've mentioned that you have interfaced with the various central banks in the region, and that you have reached a brick wall, yes? Is
No.
that my understanding?
No, we haven't reached a brick wall. The central banks are willing to work with us.
They're willing to work.
It's a bottleneck from our end of
So
resources.
it's a bottleneck. So if there is that kind of bottleneck, notwithstanding all the other educational elements that you have put forward to them, my question to you would be this. What is the most compelling educational perspective or change of mindset, as the case may be, that you could put forward? Let's leave alone the entrepreneurs. Maybe they might come along very quickly because we see sometimes they run faster than the regulatory environment. But what is the compelling educational perspective that you put forward to the central bank? A new perspective, because apparently what you have put forward have not really pulled them along swiftly.
It absolutely has, but you have to remember central bankers by design are risk averse. So they
True.
have to be very careful when some people who don't have an understanding of the technology play it off to be a very nefarious system.
True.
And then that has counterintuitive measures that hinder us from moving forward as quickly as we wanted to. Furthering that, it's a very complex subject. Bitcoin is cryptographic technology merged with finance, merged with social and economical problems, all built into one cool algorithm. So it's just to get the central bankers, the traditional central bankers, to wrap their head around that. That's months worth of processes.
So then here's another perspective from an e-commerce standpoint and looking at the wider global economic trends. In fact, you alluded to it earlier on, that probably we need to operate in the now and now rather than waiting for the sweet by and by. And therefore, they need to come along and hang on very quickly. So if that is the case, what in the now and now would you put forward to the central bank as a new strategy to get them to come along very quickly?
We have a 600-page dossier that we provide: anti-money laundering policy, a counter-terrorism financing policy, customer due diligence identification policy, cybersecurity policy, information and privacy policy, disaster recovery policy. I say that already?
And that has been presented already to the central bank.
Absolutely.
3 years.
Yeah.
3 years.
3 years.
So then it tells me that probably you may even have to look
And-
at refining the strategy.
And we have been refining the policies and procedures, and it's now alluding towards getting the support that we need along with the permission. I'm beginning to understand that the various regulators and central banks are actually really concerned about their citizens, believe it or not.
Which is a good thing.
Which is a
anyway.
very good thing, and I'm loving what I'm learning every step, or every central bank I meet with, when they review my policies or procedures, or Bitt's policies and procedures, and they get to a point where they don't have something answered, they throw a curveball our way. We're back in the engineering then, and we don't come back out till the policy and procedure matches that criteria to a level of extent that it makes the minister or the governor smile ear to ear.
Do you see light at the end of the tunnel?
I see
That's
more
the
than
last thing I'll
I
say.
see more than light at the end of the tunnel. I see absolute.
Okay.
And if I could add some value as a former central banker, there's no legislation I've ever seen that a central bank has put out, or even policy directive, that didn't require years of research. So the thing is, a lot of central banks drive a lot of their research in-house, number one. Number two, in the Caribbean, the position is always taken that if Canada hasn't done it fully, right, then we will not take a position on it, unfortunately. And we were told, if I could say so, in a meeting, Gabriel wasn't there, but we were told in a meeting that Canada hasn't done anything just as yet, so we still see the position as risky despite the novelty of the position, of the cryptocurrency. I've heard that with my own ears, and I was not surprised. So I agree that there's light at the end of the tunnel because the conversations are still being entertained and endorsed. But the thing about, especially given the legal drafting system in Barbados and the way we draft legislation in Barbados, and the amount of time that it takes to come. Oh, and actually they're waiting more so for Trinidad as well too to form a position. That also was said in the meeting. Because when it comes to financial laws as well, you guys tend to be a little more proactive than we are in Barbados. No, seriously. We don't really have anything with money service businesses yet in Barbados in terms of legislation that strictly defines it. So it always happens in terms of Canada, Jamaica, Trinidad. Then Barbados comes on and refines it and probably does it for our own purposes. So there is light at the end of the tunnel when the central banker say to you, let's see what Canada is going to do. Let's see what Trinidad is going to do. So you need to get it done quickly, right? And then probably there will be even more light at the end of the tunnel.
All right, I said we were done, but you're standing there so politely.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Just we talked a lot about the central banks. How are the commercial banks reacting to all of this? Do you find they're trying to put in barriers in place, or do you find that they recognize this technology marching on and we need to get on the bandwagon or take over?
They haven't added any barriers. As a matter of fact, our central bank in Barbados just gave us an award, an entrepreneurship award, at an event they held a couple months ago, Innovation Award for Entrepreneurship. They've invited us to attend conferences in China, which they funded. They've been plugging us with to MIT. We recently attended an event that our central bank organized. So they've been pushing us forward without officially saying that they're pushing us forward.
What about commercial banks?
Oh, the commercial banks? There are a few commercial banks that want to work with us, and they're few and far in between. Majority of them close the door in our faces, to be quite frank.
But that's not isolated to the Caribbean. Even in the UK, whereas the Bank of England has taken a very proactive stance on digital currency. Just a couple of days ago, I was reading a report that maybe the Bank of England needs to offer entrepreneurs accounts because the commercial banking sector, because of this whole issue of de-risking as well, it's affecting them there in getting bank accounts. So you're quite right in that the commercial banks themselves need to be a little more responsive towards the needs of entrepreneurs in this area. And again, shameless plug to the report, but we uncovered that within the report as well, that entrepreneurs entering into the mobile money space or the digital currency space faced opposition in getting bank accounts to run their business.
And in the Caribbean, in Barbados especially, where none of our banks are locally owned, there's less of an impetus to follow the directives of a central bank. And it's rather unfortunate where outside of the legal support and outside of, because we didn't see it, outside of even the Financial Services Commission having a signed document stating that they are endorsing what we do, what Bitt does, because there's no legislation to really say it differently at the point of time. The Canadians make decisions based on Canadian risk. And unfortunately, and I have no idea why RBC in Barbados does this, because really a great bit of that mind exists here in Trinidad. So, in terms of the ownership of the RBC interest in Barbados is predominantly Trinidadian owner. So, the RBC interest in Barbados is RBC Canada sold the majority of the interest to RBTT, and RBTT amalgamated into RBC in Barbados. It was the other way around. Okay, so we control Canada. Well, good. So then, thank you. So then that strengthens. Thank you for telling me that bit. That bit I was not even clear on. So that even then strengthens the argument that I'm trying to make, because it just proves that there's no mind within the Caribbean, despite the fact that our central bank in Barbados is very pro cryptocurrency in a sense, and our FSC. So we have that as a major challenge going forward. But thank you for that information. I wasn't even clear on that one.
Okay. it seems to me that that particular discussion would make a good discussion during a coffee break, which is what we're now scheduled for.
But one last thing to add to what Nigel was asking about the commercial bank. We have a video presentation tomorrow from someone who wrote an article on that particular issue of he's going to be talking about risk tomorrow. So stay tuned tomorrow.
Tomorrow is Risk Day. So thank you, everybody, and thank you to our panelists.